The patrol would arrive in the corridor outside the holding bay in approximately 20 minutes. Hattori had counted the interval between the last two patrols, 31 minutes the first time, 28 the second, and noted the shortening. Someone in the chain of command had noticed the cell break. Someone had decided the response cadence needed tightening, and someone, almost certainly a different someone, had fielded the order to tighten it without reading the report on what had actually happened in the cell. This was the shape of the enemy, and Hattori had been mapping it since the moment the enormous Norseman had torn the cell door from its track. He sat at the edge of the staging area, back against a warm conduit housing, and turned the scrap of hull plating in his fingers. The fragment was roughly the size of his palm, a piece of the drone the Norseman had dismantled with his bare hands. Hattori had picked it up from the floor while the others were forming their positions. He had picked it up the way he picked up everything, because it was information, and information was architecture, and architecture was the difference between a castle that held and a castle that fell. Around him the holding bay hummed. The sodium orange light turned everything the color of a watchfire banked low. The tall Roman was organizing bodies near the center, gestures, demonstrations, the physical grammar of a man who had spent his life turning strangers into a unit. The woman who read terrain, the one with the wide-set eyes, who carried the stillness of years spent on open ground, had positioned herself at the corridor junction, watching the approaches. She had not been told to do this. She had simply gone to where watching was useful. They were competent, all of them, in their different registers. The Norseman was a weapon, the Roman was a commander, the terrain reader was precisely that. The young dark-skinned woman who touched everything as though she expected it to answer. She was something else entirely, something Hattori did not have a word for yet, but she understood these walls and panels the way a castle engineer understood stone. Good, he did not need them to be anything other than what they were. He needed them to keep doing it for 20 more minutes, because in 20 minutes the patrol would come, and it would be larger than the last one, and it would end this. Unless Hattori ended it first. The captain wants his manifest corrected, the slaver wants his cargo secured. Those are different problems with different solutions. The patrol exists for the second. I need to make it solve the first. He had seen it in the way the combine personnel moved. There were two authority structures on this vessel, and they overlapped badly. The one who sat on the raised platform, the captain, the one whose voice carried the cadence of a man reading from a ledger, wanted the disruption logged, categorized, and resolved through standard procedure. The other one, the one who walked the corridor edges rather than the center, the one whose eyes tracked the humans the way a falconer's tracked a raptor, wanted something different. The slaver wanted to understand what he was carrying. That was the gap. In every castle Hattori had ever studied, in every clan, every alliance, every war council he had survived, the gap between what the Lord wanted and what the retainer wanted was where leverage lived. You did not attack a castle at its strongest point. You attacked the relationship between the man who held the gate and the man who held the key, and you made them realize they wanted different doors opened. The guard who had broken in the holding bay, the one who had frozen when the Norsemen moved, had been a useful data point. Mid-tier security, trained for compliance, chose protocol over escalation. He had not fought. He had waited for someone to tell him what the protocol was, and when no one did, he had defaulted to inaction. That was the institution. Rules without adaptation. A machine that worked because no one had ever pushed hard enough to reveal the seams. The slaver, though, the slaver was different. The slaver was the only one on this ship who was actually thinking. I was in the patrol's route 40 minutes ago. He did not see me. That is the first thing I will put on the floor between us. Hattori turned the drone fragment one more time, then placed it inside the fold of his sleeve. He looked at the notation he had scratched into the residue on the conduit housing, a map of the patrol route, assembled from the sound of boots and the rhythm of the overhead address system. The route was a loop. It passed the holding bay approach corridor, continued past the junction he had identified by the change in air pressure, and returned to what he assumed was a security station near the vessel's center. He had been inside that loop 40 minutes ago, when the Norseman was still breaking the cell door. Hattori had been 3 corridors away, watching the patrol pass. He had pressed himself into a maintenance alcove that smelled of ozone and burnt sugar, and he had counted boots. 4. Standard formation. The one at the rear, the slaver, had paused at the alcove entrance for a full 2 seconds and had not looked in. His attention had been elsewhere. In that moment, the slaver had been listening to his communication device, and the message had been about the cell break, and the cell break was more interesting than a dark alcove that the behavioral scan had flagged as empty. The behavioral scan had been wrong. Hattori had been in the alcove. The scan had not detected him because Hattori had been standing very still, breathing very slowly, doing nothing that the scan's parameters recognized as threatening. He had been invisible to the system, visible to the eye perhaps, but invisible to the system. That was the second thing he would put on the floor. Hattori stood. He rolled his neck once, felt the vertebrae settle. The sleeve with the drone fragment hung correctly. He crossed to the conduit housing, pressed his thumb against the scratched patrol route diagram, and memorized the angles one final time. Part of it clean with the heel of his hand, and scratched, in addition, a mark indicating position, his position, where he had stood, inside the route, unseen. He did not inform the Roman. The Roman would try to stop him, and the Roman would be right to try, and Hattori would then have to explain a strategy in a language neither of them spoke. The explanation would cost minutes he did not have. Instead, Hattori walked to the corridor mouth, glanced once at the terrain reader stationed there. She saw him. Her eyes tracked the movement, but she did not move to block, and stepped out. The corridor was empty. The sodium light painted it in flat amber, no shadows deep enough to hide in. This was intentional. Hattori walked to the center of the passage, stopped, and turned to face the direction the patrol would come from. He placed his hands at his sides. Open, visible. The drone fragment in his sleeve was concealed but accessible. The notation, the scratched map, he had transferred to a flat piece of debris that fit in his palm. He stood and waited. The patrol arrived in 4 minutes, faster than expected. The cadence was tightening again. 4 figures in the dull carapace of combined security equipment. The lead was the standard type, the mid-tier guard, the protocol follower, the one who would see a human standing in a corridor and reach for the containment tool because that was what the procedure manual said to do. The second and third were the same. The fourth, at the rear, was the slaver. The patrol lead raised a device, a rod-shaped tool that Hattori had seen used on 3 other humans in the holding bay. It delivered a shock that dropped a person to the floor. The lead pointed it at Hattori and spoke Oa. The words were combined language, incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable. Compliance instruction. Lie down. Submit. Be cargo. Hattori did not move. He watched the slaver. The slaver was watching him back. The patrol lead watched with the mechanical attention of someone executing a procedure. The slaver's eyes moved from Hattori's hands, open, visible, to his posture, balanced, deliberate, to his face, calm, waiting, and the slaver's head tilted 3 degrees to the left. Recognition, not of Hattori specifically, of the category. The slaver had seen this before, perhaps not in humans, but in some other cargo, some other harvest that had produced an individual who did not fight and did not submit, but instead chose. The slaver knew the difference between compliance and strategy because the slaver was, in his own register, a strategist. That was the tell Hattori had been waiting for. The patrol lead stepped forward. Hattori allowed himself to be restrained. The containment tool pressed against his shoulder and delivered its charge. The shock was significant, a hard jolt that locked his jaw and weighted his vision for 2 full seconds, but it was calibrated for something that wasn't him. The charge was meant to drop him, and it didn't. He staggered but stayed upright, and the patrol lead looked at the tool as if it had malfunctioned. It hadn't. It had performed exactly to specification. The specification was wrong. The slaver spoke, a short phrase directed at the patrol lead. The tone was authority, quiet, practiced, unargued. The patrol lead stepped back. The slaver moved to the front. He looked at Hattori for a long moment. Then he gestured, not with a weapon but with an open hand, indicating a direction, a branching corridor, away from the patrol route. Standard protocol, Hattori imagined. High-value cargo. Someone who surrendered strategically was a management problem, not a containment problem. Received separate assessment. The slaver was following procedure technically. He was separating a valuable specimen for individual evaluation. Hattori went where the slaver indicated. The alcove was a maintenance pocket, 3 walls of conduit housing, 1 open side facing a dead-end corridor, the same burnt sugar ozone smell. The light here was dimmer, filtered through a grill that separated this section from the main corridor system. The slaver stood at the open side, his back to the corridor. He had dismissed the patrol with a gesture. They had gone. He was alone with Hattori, and he was unafraid, and Hattori respected that. You would have made this harder. The slaver's composure meant he was thinking clearly, and a clear thinker could be shown the architecture of a problem. Hattori knelt, in presentation, not submission. He placed 3 objects on the floor between them. The first, the drone fragment. A maleficence of the machine the Norsemen had destroyed. I know what you sent. The second, the flat piece of debris on which Hattori had scratched the patrol route, the loop, the junction, the timing marks. He placed his fingertip on a position inside the route, the position where he had stood 40 minutes ago unseen. I know where they are. I was inside your perimeter and you did not see me. The third, a mark scratched directly into the floor with the edge of the debris, the holding bay's position relative to the patrol route. And around it, small scratches indicating bodies, many bodies, more than the slaver's manifest said should be free. I know what you don't know I know. Hattori sat back on his heels. He placed his hands on his thighs. He waited. The slaver looked at the 3 objects. Lustisantages, through several phases, each legible despite the alienness of his features. Surprise came first, the brief widening of the structures around his eyes, the stillness of his jaw. Then calculation, the rapid back and forth between the patrol route diagram and the position mark, checking the geometry, understanding what it meant. Then something Hattori recognized across every species barrier he could imagine, because he had seen it on the faces of rival clan commanders in the moment they understood the battle was already over. Professional acknowledgement. You are claiming to be the most expensive problem I have encountered in 14 years of this work, the slaver said. Hattori did not understand the words. He understood the tone, the rueful cadence of a competent person confronting a situation that exceeded his operational parameters. Hattori had heard that tone from castle commanders who opened their gates, from arithmetic, not from fear. He responded the only way the situation allowed. He pointed to the patrol route diagram, then to himself, then to the position inside the route where he had stood. Then he tapped the diagram twice. I was there. You didn't know. The slaver looked at the diagram, looked at Hattori, looked at the drone fragment. The silence stretched. It was productive, the silence of a man whose calculations were arriving at a conclusion he had already suspected. Then the slaver reached for the communication device at his jaw. He spoke into it, 3 short phrases. The tone was authorization, not urgent, not panicked. Administrative, a redirect order. The patrol was being sent elsewhere, not disbanded, redirected. The slaver was not helping Hattori. He was choosing the interpretation of his own procedures that best served his own survival. He put the device down. His face, in that moment, belonged to a professional who had made the correct call and was already composing the report that would justify it. Cargo assessment indicated non-standard behavioral patterns. Patrol redirected to secondary containment zone pending evaluation. Recommend revised classification. He chose correctly, Hattori thought. Competent people usually do, when the cost of the wrong choice is made sufficiently clear. Hattori stood. He collected the drone fragment, his, earned, useful, and left the patrol route diagram on the floor. A gift. Let the slaver see what Hattori had seen. Let him understand the shape of the problem his institution had created by not looking closely enough. The slaver did not stop him from leaving. The corridor junction was empty. Hattori walked back along the route he had mapped, turned the last corner, and found the terrain reader exactly where he had left her. She was standing at the corridor mouth, her body angled to watch both approaches, and the patrol that had been visible in the far passage, the one she had been tracking for the last hour, was gone. She looked at the empty corridor, looked at Hattori. Her expression did not change. She was not a woman whose face announced her conclusions, but her eyes moved from Hattori to the direction the patrol had been, and then back, and she shifted her weight half a degree, the adjustment a person made when their assessment of someone nearby had just been revised. Hattori entered the staging area. The Roman was near the center, organizing a second rank of freed captives, and he looked up as Hattori passed. His gaze swept the corridor behind Hattori, empty, and then found the terrain reader at the junction. Where did he go? The Roman's words were in his own language, directed at the terrain reader with a look more than a voice, but the question was clear in any tongue. The terrain reader did not answer. She looked at the space where the patrol had been and let the absence speak. The young woman, the modern one, the one who understood the walls, was the only one who asked directly. She crossed to Hattori with the purposeful stride of someone who had decided that ignorance was worse than any possible answer. She spoke in her own language. He did not understand the words, but he understood the question because it was written in the angle of her jaw and the set of her hands, and the fact that she was the only person in this group who would walk up to a man who had just done something inexplicable and demand an explanation she couldn't receive. He did not answer in any language she spoke. Instead, he looked past her, toward the next corridor, the one that led deeper into the ship, toward cell blocks the group had not yet reached, toward walls that hummed with something other than recycled air, and raised an eyebrow. The question was clear enough. What is behind that wall?